Welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed the plenary sessions. We would like to acknowledge that there were a few problems with the plenary sessions, which you can't expect. You can expect on occasions. And we'd like your feedback on that. As somebody said, you can never be a complete failure because you can always serve as a poor example. But we would like some feedback so we can improve that. I'm actually quite impressed with the breadth of what's been covered here today. When we look at the genetics of brain tumors, we've looked at the surgery, we've looked at mindfulness. I sat in on a caregiver session, and now we're going to have a discussion on some of the research aspects, which I think some of you are quite interested in, especially when you're working hard on raising money with the golf tournaments and the runs and the walks. Now, it is my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Sten Myrehaug, who's going to moderate this panel. And this is an insightful discussion about actual clinical trials, featuring both patient perspective and that of our healthcare expert. We would like to thank Togagen for sponsoring this session. Clinical trials have allowed the medical community to improve treatments and the quality of life of patients everywhere. As part of your treatment, your surgeon or oncologist may have presented you with the option of participating in a clinical trial. For this reason, it's important to know what they are and what it means to be part of one if you choose to participate in a clinical trial. Dr. Myrehaug and the panelists speak. Please write any questions that you have on a cue card. Again, we'll have a question and answer session. Sam and Abigail will walk around and collect those questions from you. Dr. Myrehaug is our moderator, is an associate professor in the Department of Radiation Oncology at the University of Toronto, and is a radiation oncologist at the Odette Cancer Centre at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Centre. He is actively involved in the treatment of central nervous system cancers and is currently the primary investigator on 2 trials regarding the management of primary brain tumors and spinal metastases. We'll ask Dr. Myrehaug to now come to the podium, and he'll introduce the panelists and get things started.
Thank you, Dr. Shank, and good afternoon, everyone. Before I have the opportunity to introduce our panelists to the stage, I would like to thank you all for the chance to speak here today. It provides me great hope for the future, despite dealing with a formidable foe, brain tumors. What I think is unique about this conference has been how it has highlighted the concerted approach to manage all aspects of this disease, from diagnosis all the way to survivorship. There's so many different elements to manage, treat, and research when it comes to brain tumors. Buzzwords are everywhere. You may have heard of genomics, proteomics, radionomics, viruses, genes, targeted agents, inhibitors. Medical research continues to search for treatments that are more personalized and more effective for people diagnosed. As we make progress, the after effects of these burgeoning therapies need to be addressed. Given the unique issues faced by patients with brain tumors, not only do the treating physicians need to be aware of and help lessen the neurocognitive effects of their therapies, but we need the involvement of our allied health teams. I looked around today at the displays, and the thing that was most striking to me were people's name tags with the word survivor underneath. And to me, that's actually the most powerful part of this whole conference, was seeing that word. Survivorship is now extending to brain tumors and central nervous system patients. And as we heard this morning, efforts are underway to understand post-treatment complications and how to develop strategies to minimize their impact. With a concerted effort to combine the strengths of all of our disciplines, we can continue to make gains. But we can't do this without the support and willingness of patients to enroll in clinical trials. As a cancer researcher, I thank everyone who's part of a trial. It is your selflessness and bravery that allows us to push our research forward. With this in mind, I want to first and foremost thank our panelists who have been on clinical trials and are here today to speak of their experiences. experiences that will help guide not only patients and survivors like yourselves, but the doctors and other healthcare experts who are part of the clinical trials team. So with that, I would like to welcome and bring our panelists to stage. So first, I'd like to give a round of applause for Steve, Denis, and Francois. Our first panelist is Steve. And so as we get started, Steve, I was wondering if you could explain the kind of tumor that you were diagnosed with and when you were diagnosed.
Low-grade glioma, I guess more specifically, grade 2 diffuse astrocytoma. And I was diagnosed in 2010. I just happened to be out of the country and I had a bad seizure. I didn't know what it was at the time. And at the time, they weren't sure if it was glioma or just bleeding. And it wasn't until 3 months later at Toronto Western they confirmed it was a glioma.
Okay. Now, before we get into the clinical trial, could you tell us the path that led you to the trial? What treatments did you receive at first?
Initially, after diagnosis, it was just a wait-and-see approach.
Mm-hmm.
And my tumor didn't grow until about 2 years after I had MRIs every 6 months. 2 years later, it started to grow. And that's when I guess they scheduled an operation for me.
And with that, could you tell us the name of your clinical trial and what it was for?
Okay, the name of the clinical trial, and I hope I get this right, it's a comparison of dexmedetomidine and propofol remifenatide, conscious sedation for awake craniotomy for tumor surgery. And how they explain it. I couldn't do that a second time. And how they explained it to me was, before going into the surgery, I was going to be in one of two groups. And apparently the dexmedetomidine is the newer anesthesia, which I read up on later has fewer respiratory adverse effects. But I wouldn't know which anesthesia I would be taking. And basically that's a clinical trial I was on.
Okay. And how did you find out about this trial? Was it something that you had researched and looked into, or was it something that you were approached by the healthcare team?
No, it just happened literally hours before the operation. I was just waiting to go into the operating room, and two assistants for the person running the clinical trial approached me and my wife and asked if we'd be willing to participate. And they briefly explained the trial. And rightfully having faith in the medical personnel and that I agreed to do it. And I signed a consent form and that was it.
And when you were, when they were discussing the trial with you, was there anything about it in terms of how the healthcare team approached you that helped you decide that you would like to be on the trial?
I guess their explanation of why they were doing the trial. I mean, and I wanted to be as helpful as I could because I was grateful for all the care I was being given. And and you assume clinical trials, they're pushing the boundaries, or they're always seeking better ways, and you want to be a part of that.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Our second panelist of the day is Denis.
Hi. I need two of these for my large head.
Now, Denis,
Yeah, stereo. That's it.
you were diagnosed with a glioblastoma multiforme, which
Yes,
we
sir.
short form call GBM. And I was wondering if you could describe the trial that you were enrolled in, and similar to the question I asked Steve, was kind of your treatment step that led you to being part of that trial.
First of all, I love that you added the accent at the end of multiforme. It's awesome. It's the fancy way of pronouncing the long term of GBM. Oh, neat. I just found myself. The question. As you said, I was diagnosed with glioblastoma multiforme, GBM, or Form A, and I was kind of enrolled in two clinical trials, and in the sense that I was originally on one, and then I switched, actually, which is something that's relatively unheard of, and I can speak to that a little bit later. But in essence, what my clinical trial is the NovoCure 100 ATTF device, now is known as the Optune, which I stand by as a terrible name. And it was in conjunction with temozolomide. So I followed the standard treatment of care, but the clinical trial asked for me to essentially double up while I was taking my temozolomide, which I would end up doing for 12 months, for 12 cycles, 5 days on, 23 days off. I would also use a medical device, as you can see in the picture there, with the super fashionable backpack. And I would wear that as close to 24 hours a day as possible, which of course is impossible, but as much as possible. And I wore it for 2.5 years. I don't know if that answered the question or not. I don't actually remember what the question was. The brain tumor.
So you talked about you're on the trial for years, and I was wondering if you could describe what it's like to be on a trial and to be followed for that period of time. Because one of the issues that we grapple with...
somebody following me? Sorry.
One of the issues we grapple with as clinicians putting people on trials and where we're devising studies is, of course, we want to get as much information as possible, but also try to find a way that we're minimizing the impact on patients' lives as much as possible. So, you were on for a long time. And so I was wondering if you could explain what it was like to be in a trial for such a long period of time and how you felt the follow period went.
Mm-hmm. So something to note is that my specific clinical trial, my specific treatment made it so that it was constantly on my mind or on my head, so to speak. So really, it was probably very different for me than, say, the other panelists or anybody else, where, oftentimes you'll have a new type of surgery or a new type of, but it's just kind of one thing or one series of treatments and that's it. Whereas for me, I was wearing this medical device for, like I said, 2.5 years. I really appreciated it that I was followed so closely. And I think that was one of the biggest pluses for me, because whereas typically after a year or two, your MRIs kind of start spacing out further and further for most patients. For those 2.5 years, I was constantly on a 2-month MRI basis. I would go to the hospital every single month to get checkups. So being followed so closely almost helps kind of deal with the general anxiety of dealing with the recurrence, because I figured, well, if I'm going to the hospital so often, there's going to be a chance that, whatever recurrence comes, if it comes, we'd be able to catch it pretty quickly. So I appreciated that aspect of it. Now, the actual device itself was very, very, well, I wouldn't say it was hard to deal with, but it definitely affected my life in many ways. All of a sudden I had to think about, the biggest thing was the batteries. I'd have to manage my batteries all the time. because the batteries were as large as laptops, and they would last 3 hours each. A lot of people ask me, oh, wow, it must have been so hard to sleep with. It wasn't at all. They have me like, they have this picture, this image of me like wearing my backpack and not being able to roll over or something. And I'm just like, there was a bungee cord. I could like just leave it next to my bed. It was fine. It was like, oh, but what about your head? It's like, I don't know. It just becomes part of you after a while. So I guess it really depends. For me, it was, to stop rambling. I adapted to it very quickly and very well, and it was almost out of necessity that I did it, and it really helped with my anxiety. Not only the fact that I was getting followed so often, but it also made me feel like I was more in control. It made me feel like I was actively doing something on a regular basis that was, had me focused on getting better.
Okay. And the last question I have for you is, you talked about the logistics barriers of having to wear the backpack and the apparatus on your head, but from a systems or personal perspective, what were the greatest barriers for you joining a trial, or were there any?
At the very, very beginning, like joining it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is something that's very little, it's a little known fact about me. I was actually part of a trial before the one that you see me pictured with. And the original trial was offered to me, so to speak, and this is, I can't stress this enough, don't necessarily do this, but, so I went in, I found out that I had cancer, and it was almost the first meeting. You get in this kind of zone where you're just, this headspace where you hear the word cancer and you just, I remember just blanking right out emotionally. I was gone. I remember looking over to my mother, and my mother was bawling her eyes out. And I remember turning over to her and being like, it's okay, it's fine, everything's fine. Not really understanding the whole situation. Anyways, beside the point, somebody described to me what a clinical trial was at that same meeting and said, here's a great clinical trial that you could access. Would you like to sign up? And of course, me being, I want to help everybody. Absolutely, I signed up. It was a phase 1. I couldn't tell you the name. Anyways, I realized afterwards, after a week or two, that it wasn't necessarily a good clinical trial. It was a phase 1, which is great because you need to have patience for phase 1 trials. I understand all that, but it wasn't necessarily me being also GBM patient, being a little bit selfish. I kind of want access to the phase 3 stuff because the phase 3 clinical trials are the ones that have reached an international audience and therefore have more drive behind it. So what I did was I found out that I was on the control arm of that first clinical trial. And then I researched and I found myself. I didn't find myself. I found myself. I found the clinical trial, the phase 3 clinical trial. I found 2 of them that I might have been eligible for. And after doing much research on the 2, I decided on this one. And this was completely on my own. Completely on my own. I found it. I went into my doctor's office. I had both printouts. I had the printout of the trial that I was on before and the trial that I was on after, or that I would be on after. I said, get me off this, put me on this. I don't want to say that I had, I didn't have faith in my medical team, because I did. And that's why I signed up in that original first trial that I was on. But I might have done it a little bit, off the. Be an advocate for yourself is what I'm trying to say. Be an advocate for yourself, because that's what I ended up doing, and that's how I ended up accessing this new trial. And so really, the main barrier was the fact that I didn't feel like I was presented with all of my options at the time, and I think I would have benefited more from having, a full picture of the clinical trials landscape, so to speak. I guess that would be my answer to that one.
That's great. Thank you very much, Denny. Thank you for your experience. And our third panelist is Francois.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Francois. I live in Pittsburgh. I'm 43. I'm originally from France. So I was diagnosed with a brain tumor 4 years ago, 2012. My wife was about to give birth to my first kid. Bad timing, perfect storm. I was driving to work one day, just had a seizure. I blacked out in the middle of the traffic. Actually, I should have died that day in a traffic accident, in a car accident. So I'm a survivor of that. And I just found myself in a hospital where people were telling me, "You had a seizure, sir." I didn't even know what it was. So I had a scan. They told me there is something wrong in your brain. That I knew that, and everybody already had told me that before. But actually, they had a picture. They had an evidence. Okay, all right. I'm transferred to UPMC Pittsburgh, and actually, I have an MRI scan. And in the middle of the night, I have my neurosurgeon to be stopping in my room and saying, it was probably 4 a.m., saying, "Well, you have a rather benign," that's a way to put it, rather benign brain tumor. And I just asked, "Is that a cancer?" And he said, "No, probably not, but we'll have to take care of it at some point." Okay, I said, "Fine." But I said, "There's just a little problem. I have to set the priorities, doctor. I have a baby coming, and that we cannot delay that. I mean, it's..." So basically, they just came back home, and we set priorities with my wife. So there was a brain tumor, okay. We set the priorities, and we just scheduled everything the way it was to be scheduled. The delivery of my son first. It was just 12 days later. And then, complication for my son, complication for my wife, bad luck. So we scheduled, everybody came back home at some point, and then we said, okay, I called the surgeon and said, "I'm ready, let's go." And he had said initially, we have time to take care of it. I said, "No, I want that thing out of me. I don't want to keep it." So we just scheduled surgery the following week. And that was the first brain surgery. 1 year later, for some reason, I had to change. I could not go to UPMC anymore because of my health insurance. And I went to Cleveland Clinic, an MRI, just to build a baseline, make sure everything is okay. Because initially, I had a standard treatment, radiation, chemotherapy, because they found out it was, what you have probably here, an anaplastic astrocytoma, grade 3. Probably what you have, yeah. And so I went through the standard treatment. 1 year later, then I'm going to Cleveland Clinic, an MRI, and they say, "Well, your last MRI at UPMC was okay, was good, but now it's back. So we're sorry, the tumor is back. But good news, you qualify for the Tokajan clinical trial." Ah, okay. So, and they put my name on the waiting list, and he said, "Well, this is probably the best option for you." I said, "Fine." And that's how we started the treatment.
Could you describe for us what the trial was and what actually happened to you with the trial?
Pardon me, can you say that again?
Sure. What was the trial? So you mentioned you're on the Tokajan trial, but for the audience who doesn't know what that is, what is the Tokajan trial?
The trial was the following. It was phase 1 of Tokajan, TokaFC, TOKA511. You have 2 parts in the treatment. One is actually the injection in your brain of a virus, TOKA511. So then you have to undergo one more brain surgery operation. They remove the tumor coming back, and they inject in some areas in the cavity that virus. Second part is the TOKA-FC part. It's actually pills you take every 6 weeks and for 7 days in a row. And every 12 weeks, you have an MRI scan, and that's it. So I've been on that trial for the last 3 years, and I'm doing fine.
So you mentioned it's a phase 1 trial, and I was wondering if you could tell the audience some of the concerns that you may have had going into a clinical trial.
Well, phase 1, as it was explained to me, was actually to assess the safety of the treatment. So probably they were escalating a little bit the dose and checking how I was doing. I had no concern. I'm an engineer. I fix problems for customers. I fix problems for processes, products, and so on. I just say that I have to fix something, but I don't have the tools in my toolbox. So actually, I said, well, it's my problem, but maybe it can be the problem of somebody else. So take the problem and try to solve it. So, and I said, I found a clinical trial. They can potentially solve it. It's innovative. Innovation is what I do. I understand perfectly. There are some risks. I deal with risk every day. I might come up with a solution or not. Well, but I just accepted it. I was excited about it. I've always been excited about the clinical trial. Always.
And this is a question that I'm going to ask you, but I'm also now going to pose it to other panelists as well, because all three of you came to your trial at different points in your disease, starting from the time of surgery to following to at time of recurrence. And so one question I've got for you, and this is for the clinicians in the audience, would be, when was the best time to be approached about going on trial? And Denis, I take your first point about that first meeting where, you don't remember a thing that's told to you, that, you've just heard the name of the disease and what it means. And, when is appropriate time to be discussing these things? And what I find interesting is each of you came at a different part of your time of diagnosis and treatment. So for us in the audience, we'll start with you, Francois, if you could say, when would you have liked to have been approached about trials, and in what way or what format would you like it?
Well, I first gave, and I've been for the last 3 years on the treatment, on the trial, and it's only recently, I would say, that I gave feedbacks and some films. Some films were cast actually at Cleveland Clinic. It's just only recently, and it takes time before you're ready to share, to give a feedback or talk about it. It's a little difficult because personally, I wanted to ignore what had happened.
So when you were approached by the team at Cleveland Clinic about joining a trial, was it the first time that you had met them? Because you said you had transferred from UPMC to Cleveland. And so had you built a relationship with the team at Cleveland yet? Or was it, a point, have an MRI and then, oh, here's the issue, but we have a trial for you. How did they broach that with you?
I have an excellent relationship with the research nurse, my neuro-oncologist, and even the neurosurgeon. Excellent relationship. This is very strong.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. So same question for you, Denis, about the timing of when to approach people on trials. You started from your diagnosis onwards. So when would you have liked to hear about things? When would have been the appropriate time to talk about this?
Definitely not the very first meeting. I think, at least for me personally, I would have liked to have had a little bit more time to process. However, I do also realize that clinical trials, to get into a clinical trial is sometimes very time-sensitive matter. So I recognize that as well. So I think the concept should have been introduced right away, the concept of a clinical trial. And I think maybe, just having some papers, something like some printouts, or a list of websites or something to check out, so I could do my own research in the matter. And honestly, I think any suggestions of which trials to go on, I think as early as the second meeting, really, the next follow-up would have been okay with me, as long as I had time to kind of process the fact that, my situation, because that's really should be the number one priority, is first coming to terms with what your situation is, and then looking, okay, now what do I do? That first step wasn't accomplished yet.
Okay.
So I guess that would be
Right, and so Steve, same question. So yours, again, a different acuity in terms of when you were approached for the trial, and did you have enough time to think about it and process implications of being on trial, or could there have been a better way that could have been broached and explained to you?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it was just hours before my operation, a bit of a stressful time. Funnily enough, I was very calm. I don't know how to explain that. But yeah, in an ideal world, I guess I agree with Denis, it would have been good to know a few weeks ahead of time, do a little research, get used to it. But I realize that's probably not possible. So my wife and I, our first reaction was, is this going to add risk to the operation? Then after thinking about it, we assumed it had been tested on monkeys or something before it got to this stage. And we would be in safe hands, so.
Okay. All right, so that ends the formal component. So first, I'd just like to give a hand to all of our panelists, please. So I'd like to thank you all for sharing your experiences. And so for the next phase of the session, I'm going to open it up to the audience. So I hope as during the talks you've had a chance to formulate some questions or things that you would like to know. And so now they'll be gathered by the team, and we'd be happy to answer as many as possible. I'm easy with that. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point. And with any clinical trial that's been devised, it always needs to go through a research ethic board before it can be put into clinical practice. And so the REBs, in short, they're designed not only to assess the scientific integrity of the trial, but ensure that protection of the patients is foremost. And so each trial does have scrutiny, and an unbiased group of experts will decide whether or not the design is in the best interests of the patients. And so, not commenting directly on his case, these things are put into very systematic practice before anything can be put through towards public use. Again, it was alluded, sometimes there is time constraints with being on trial, and it depends on acuity of what we see. I think, again, ideally it would be nice to have more than a couple of hours to talk about the implications of a study to truly make an informed consent about going on treatment. But on the other hand, sometimes surgery needs to happen now. And in order to give people the opportunity to be on trial, which is the other part of ethics, is being able to ensure that anybody who can be on a trial should be on it. So, there's that other component of it, is that we wouldn't want to exclude people based solely on a time constraint. We see this very often with some drug trials where if it's multi-center, you may be allotted only 10 spots for your own center. And so there's somewhat of a rush to get people onto those trials if we think that they would be a good candidate. So, again, the time constraint comes in as play as well. But that's a good question, and it's something we grapple with. The informed consent component of it is hard. What is true informed consent? when people are vulnerable or scared, are they really providing informed consent? And it's something that is looked at with trials, and certainly on the consent form and the consent process that it's scrutinized. Okay, so this question is going to be for Francois. So how long in entirety was the Tokagen trial?
How long was the?
Was the trial, how long were you under the clinical trial?
3 years.
3 years, from start to finish?
Yeah, I'm not finished. I'm still a patient.
They're still accruing, they're still
Yeah.
gathering data, okay.
I have on the paperwork, there is a plan for the next 15 years.
Okay.
It gives hope. No?
And the second part of the question was, prior to your enrollment on the trial, so you mentioned you were previously treated with radiation and temozolomide therapy. Did you have any other therapies after that, CCNU or other chemotherapeutic agents before you went on this trial?
No. I'm just on that trial. That's it.
Okay. Okay. The next question for Francois was your first tumor grade 2 and misdiagnosed, or was it a grade 3 up front and then recurred a year later?
No, it was a grade 3. As I said, the first surgeon looking at the MRI said, maybe he shouldn't have said that, but he said it looks benign. So I came back home, it's benign. And after the resection, well, he found out it was grade 3 anaplastic astrocytoma, and it never changed. When I studied the trial, there was as I say, the one part is to inject the virus in the brain to resect what's coming back, and to inject the virus in the brain, the cavity. So actually, they ran another biopsy, and they just said it's the same exact thing. Okay. So there was no misdiagnosis.
And just a point for you, it says, no, you should not have died in a traffic accident. If that were true, you wouldn't be here today sharing your story. So just a statement for you.
Okay.
So I'm now going to move this direction on the panel. So Steve, what were some of the known side effects that were discussed with you as being part of your trial? And did you experience any side effects from your treatments?
If they did mention any side effects when they were explaining the trial, I don't recall. And because I don't know if I actually received the new anesthesia or not, I'm not sure what the expected side effects would have been. All I know is that I got sick after the surgery, which I always do anyway. That was one thing I was hoping, that this new anesthesia might prevent that, but that wasn't the case.
Okay. So Denny, same question for you. Did they explain the potential side effects, and did you experience any of them on your trial?
I knew that there was going to be a lot of, like I said, lifestyle changes just coming with this medical device that I had to wear. But in terms of what side effects would have happened, it's a little bit hard to say because I was also taking temozolomide at the time. But they said some scalp irritation, and that's pretty much it. Which is actually one of the pluses as well of the trial itself, because when it first went through a clinical trial, it was that or temozolomide in a previous trial that I was not a part of. And interestingly enough, it had succeeded at hitting all the same markers as the temozolomide arm, but with significantly less side effects. Scalp irritation.
Okay. And again, Francois, for you, what side effects were explained to you as potential of the trial, and did you experience any of them?
Well, as far as, the document I got for the clinical trial was probably mentioning a couple of possibilities, like probably the end was the another cancer or the death or whatever. You signed this, I signed. I don't even remember if I read it twice. But basically, as far as being explained, the side effects, yes, probably I was briefly, but nobody was suggesting anything because we were trying to assess whether or not there were some and what they were. So they were more, it was more like, these famous famous questions you get, do you have this, do you have that, and, or anything else, any change in your, any twinkling in the fingers or whatever. So actually, there was nothing clearly explained initially, and it was only what can you tell? Do you have any noticeable change? That was about it.
Yeah, I think that's a unique feature of phase 1 trials is, as you say, you're
That's
looking
what
for
you
the
want to
side
know.
effects.
I guess you want to know if there are some and to which extent. So I guess you're not suggesting any, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want to suggest any specific one, I guess.
Right. Denis, question for you. How easy was it for you to end being part of the first trial to end the second, or to start the second?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
How easy was it for you to end your involvement in the first trial to go on to the second?
Oh, ridiculously easy. Yeah. Once I had decided to do it, it was in my mind. It was done. I did get a little bit of resistance when I described going into the doctor's office and say, "Get me off this, put me on this." The original reaction was, "We can't do that." So I had to fight in that sense, but it was very straightforward to me because I just said, "Well, I know that I didn't get any experimental treatment over here, and the only thing that this says is that you can't have experimental treatment, so therefore you have no choice, give it to me." So and the interesting thing too about the clinical trial that I was asking for as well, and still to this day, there's a lot of stigma around it. Doctors don't, not all doctors, and I'm sorry, I don't like stereotyping, but it's, they don't like it. They don't like it. They don't. The reaction I got was, "You want that one, like with the backpack?" And to that I said, "Yeah." Like, I've done my research behind it, and it just makes so much sense to me. So give it to me. I don't. In the end, I'd say I had a lot of faith in my medical care team, and I understand where they're coming from. It was very different. It was very different. It was external as opposed to internal. It wasn't a vaccine or immunotherapy or anything. It was just literally something you stuck on your head as stickers, and I don't know, for whatever reason. And still to this day, a lot of people are very hesitant about it, despite the fact that some organizations in the States are now pushing for it to become the standard of care for glioblastoma. So anyways, that's me ranting.
Okay. And another question that was asked was, would a clinical trial have an end date by the company or sponsor, or is it up to the patient to exit the program? And so I think your experience about ending the program is an important one, and one of the truths of any trial is that a patient is able to withdraw at any point. So that's part of the ethics of any study, is that at any point, if a patient deems it's not in their best interest or they don't want to be part of it anymore, that is within their right to withdraw. Of course,
Can I add to that as well? So, sorry, I swear I don't talk this much, usually.
I find that hard to believe.
I know, right? With the, my experience of getting off of that trial was as such. But what was important to note as well is that I had the option to use the medical device in the second trial. I had the option to use it in like forever. basically. They would have continued providing me the device until the end of my days, if I had so choose to do that. And I ended up actually going 6 months further than they said 2 years, wear it for 2 years, and then, you know, you can keep using it if you want to or not. So I ended up doing 2.5 years before deciding to stop treatment and get off the trial. So it's like, not only is it you can go at any time, but in a lot of cases, you know, you can stop at any time as well after it's done. Anyways.
Yeah. So more to that, to the question was, each clinical trial will have defined endpoints and specific amount of time that people will be either on treatment or followed. So that is something that is specified within the trial so that we can capture data through all points of therapy and follow-up. But again, it's at the patient discretion whether or not they wish to continue on study. And I like this question a lot. This is a very philosophic one. Do you think that the clinical trials process is appropriate and best for testing new treatments, or would you have been more interested in having expedited access to unproven novel therapies? So sometimes, I guess, we hear of agents that are coming up that people are interested in getting. It's unproven. We don't have good data in support of it. Do you think that are you happy with being on a formalized trial studying these things, or would you prefer to have broader access to other molecules which may or may not have any effect?
Well, it's very comfortable being involved in the trial, knowing that there is a close follow-up. You're part of a group. You're with the best guys who know that thing. You have access to the specialty of that treatment. I mean, it's a luxury, you know. I mean, you're part of a group. You have a specific follow-up. Even if it's a little demanding. You have to show up every so many weeks for blood work, even if you have to drive 2 hours. But I believe it's very formal. It's very clear, very straightforward. Personally, that's what I prefer. And you, as a patient, I would say, my recommendation is to be a good student. Just do by the letter what the doctors are asking for. And I believe that's the best way you can work on both sides of the agreement.
Any other comments from? Yeah, I guess as a scientist, I like the rigor of the scientific method, and so access to drugs, you know, we fight for it in exceptional circumstances, but if we can answer a question which may have more broader implications, I think that would always be my preference as well. Question for Denny. What did the backpack you wore do? So can you describe what the principles behind the electrical pulses?
Apart from being just a fashionable piece, and also very practical because there was a pocket there and I could get away with basically carrying a purse around. Thanks for the chuckle there. What did it do? So, in a nutshell, cells undergoing mitosis in the brain, in general, they, so to speak, need to line up their bits in a very specific way in order for it to properly, get double of everything and separate into two identical cells. So this medical device, what it did, through the electrodes that were on my scalp, would create an alternating magnetic field, essentially, or electric field. And I am talking rapidly alternating, something like 80 times a second. And what this would do would disrupt any of these bits that contain poles, chromosomes being one of them. And it would disrupt them in a way that it would just not allow it to. multiply. So any cell essentially is affected, but going on up there after the age of 25, if there's anything growing up there, chances are it's cancerous. Don't quote me on that, but you can. So I guess that's it. It's so it would either kill the cell because it would try to multiply, and then you'd have one cell with too many bits and the other cell with less bits, or it would just slow the process right down. Some really neat videos on their website, novacure.com.
So one question that was asked was, how do people find out if it worked in comparison to the traditional treatments? And that goes to the different phases of trials that we've been talking about today. So we've got range from phase 1 to phase 3, phase 1 being making sure it's safe, to phase 3, which has gone through the other rigorous components of safety, see if there's any benefit to it, and then the gold standard, which would be phase 3 randomized controlled trial, in which people get one treatment or the other, and they're compared. So the comparator arm for a phase 3 study will always be the standard of care. And so how do you find out if a treatment worked? Truly, for best quality evidence, we need large-scale randomized trial data so that we can have long-term follow-up to say patient A got standard, patient B got experiment, and after a certain amount of time points, dependent on the disease, what we're looking for, that's how we deem whether something is a success. And so for therapies to get into mainstream treatment, it's often a long process, that a lot of these devices or drugs or concepts are things that have been looked at or thought about for 10 years. And it takes that long to go through the safety data, to go through the efficacy data, then finally onto the randomized trial in which we can deem whether or not it's actually better and alter our care. One question that we've got for Denis is, when we were talking about the timing of being exposed to trials and some of your frustrations about the first visit being a problem, at that appointment, they discussed with you the phase 1 study. And part of your frustration, do you think that at that time, would you have liked to have been given a menu of options if there was other phase 3 trials or other things at that time? And if so, do you think that that would change your viewpoint on being the first visit being an appropriate time to expose people to the concept of trial?
Absolutely, and I think that ties in with an earlier comment that I made. I would have much preferred to have been given, sure, that trial could have been presented to me, but it would have been nice to have even just having the illusion of choice, even, just giving the patient control over their own their own journey, so to speak. I think it's just much more. I don't know. It gives confidence to the patient, and it. I think that first visit would have been much better had the concept been introduced to me, and then, go home, hear some reading materials, and here are some options for clinical trials if you're interested. And of course, I hate to say it, but being a GBM patient, absolutely I was interested. And actually, I advocate for clinical trials all the time, and I encourage anybody who can access a clinical trial should access a clinical trial. Do your research, though, of course, and make sure it's right for you.
Are there any more questions? So I want to end it off with a comment that I got, and this is to show the power of this panel today. The comment is, I was asked to consider a clinical trial for my last brain surgery, the third one. I declined. I was scared and thought I was a write-off. I feel guilty. But after listening to the three gentlemen today, if it comes back for a fourth time, sign me up. I'm celebrating my 21st year of my inoperable brain tumor. So with that, again, I thank you all very much for your attention, your questions. Thank you to the panel. It was enlightening for me to hear it from the voices of people going through it, have been through it, because it certainly influences how we design trials, how we enroll trials, and how, we think about different phases of people's lives and how we can find trials that best fit where they are and what we can do for them. So I thank you very much.
Thank you.